Hi, and welcome to an episode of the JetRails podcast. I'm Robert Rand, your host. Today, we're going to be talking about helping your website live and thrive on the edge. As many of our listeners will be aware, and some will be learning about today, maybe for the first time or certainly in more depth, websites and online applications may start with hosting at a web server or a hosting account of one kind or another, but they will often have components that are distributed across a much wider network of servers, often around the globe. And so we're lucky to have with us today Stu from the Section.io team. Stewart is the CEO of Section. And Stu, would you do the honors of introducing yourself?
Yeah, absolutely, Robert. Thanks for having us. As you mentioned, I'm CEO of Section and one of the co-founders of Section. We actually started the company back in Australia some years ago and are now based out of Colorado, USA. So good to be here. We're essentially an organisation who help engineers get control of and access to those workloads in distributed formats like as you were just describing, beyond the centralized infrastructure.
Awesome. And one of my favorite companies to ask, or one of my favorite questions to ask tech companies consistently is, how did you get the name Section, or in this case, known as Section.io? How did that all come about? Is there a good story behind it?
Yeah, there's a little bit of a story behind it. We've also dropped the IO these days, so trying to shorten the world and make things more simple. We're just Section, but the origins of the name were as usual with our organisation, standing around a whiteboard with a bunch of people who are interested in thinking about what this application meant for the future of the internet. Our mission is really about changing the internet and the way applications work on the internet. And we were thinking about Section when we were thinking about the volume of traffic that was going to be traversing the internet in future, and thinking about that as an oncoming wave. So some of us at Section enjoy surfing, and the part of the wave that, or part of a surfing wave that is often talked about in surfing parlance is a section of the wave. So you either make the section or you don't make the section. It's the piece between the broken part of the waves that are probably the most interesting to surf on. So it also has a little bit of a connotation with respect to the container-based structure of our platform, in that applications are deployed in essentially sections or components on the Section platform at the edge.
So basically containerized at the edge. And let's dive in a little bit there. So what can you tell me about, from your vantage point as a leader in edge networking, what really goes into an edge network? Why these have become so important in the market? Any mystery there that you typically run into as you're explaining to folks what it is that your company has been able to achieve in these years, and why you're in such demand?
That's possibly a minefield of a question. And I think before I answer that question, we probably should tackle the big one, which is, where is the edge? So, we live on a spherical planet. And the internet is a series of interconnected devices in a mesh. Therefore, the reality is there probably isn't an edge to the internet. But we think about edge. People have come at the problem in the provider space, in the service provider space, and thought about the edge essentially as where their infrastructure is. So we'd probably like to talk about the edge as being a world of, or where the edge is being where application controllers or application owners start to lose control of components of their application, or maybe not lose control, but perhaps cede control to other parts of the internet chain. So again, some of these legacy service providers, whether it's cloud or CDN or even telcos, will all talk about the edge as being where their infrastructure is, because essentially that's where they have or will seek control of components of an application. But when we think about it from an application owner's perspective, as an application is delivered from centralized infrastructure right through to an end user, which may be an internet browser or an application user, there's actually steps all along the way there where control can be retained, maintained, or ceded subject to the application case. So we think about the edge as not just one layer in that delivery chain out to the end user, but more of what we call an edge compute continuum, in that all of those locations are edges to the internet where certain components of the application can be run, delivered, and as I was saying earlier, I guess parts of the control space of that application can be seeded along the way. So back to, I guess, your question of how do we think about an edge network, or what the section edge network is. We think about that edge network as being able to run on any parts of that application delivery chain, whether that be from the origin infrastructure through to, I guess, the infrastructure layer, cloud, through to telco and running in telco compute technology, right through to on-premise, or even down to the application device itself.
Oh, so I know you mentioned CDNs. So there's the content delivery network side of things, where instead of pulling information out of one web hosting server, you've seeded it across the edge network. And so there are copies of, let's say, media, images, or other cached files and information stored across the globe, so that there's going to be a local version. It's going to get delivered really fast in many cases. You've got other optimization layers for things like images there to compress and to deliver at the right sizes for the right browsers, the information. What else is happening out there? I know that your team, because you've got this containerized solution, you've got a lot of different things that you can drop into the solution that go above and beyond just the CDN implications, and maybe some of that optimization that can go with it.
Yeah, that's true. I think we're reaching a point now where more and more parts of applications are being delivered from distributed infrastructure. So you've mentioned a couple of those parts of an application, which is delivering images or changing the images on the fly, even, which you refer to as image optimization for better performance in the browser. But we've also got application elements such as security layers being delivered from the edge. So web application firewalls are a classic example where we're running logic, or customers are running logic at the edge to prevent spurious attacks on their website. Perhaps running some bot mitigation software at the edge to prevent scraping of proprietary information, or prevent probing attacks on their websites. We're seeing more marketing style application elements being delivered from the edge as well. So as opposed to just straight performance or security elements of the application being delivered from the edge, we've got now things like server-side multivariate testing being injected into the delivery chain from the edge. And,
so like a more advanced A/B testing, where you can have multivariate, so A, B, C, D all mixed together, to find the winning permutations and such of different changes to content or site elements.
Yeah, precisely. And being able to drop that in from server-side versus in the browser is providing some great benefits from a performance and usability perspective. So really, all of these components are parts of application logic, which are more easily injected at the edge through this container structure we've delivered, but also provides a scalability paradigm that that engineers really enjoy, because they don't have to think about these components of their application running on their servers in a centralized infrastructure. They can focus on running the important parts of the application that need to run in a centralized infrastructure on that centralized infrastructure, whilst letting the edge run these other components or other logic elements of the application.
Yeah, and I know that at JetRails we work with a lot of e-commerce users and a lot of Magento users specifically. That your team is one of the leaders in Varnish at the edge, and so that's certainly been interesting in terms of opportunities there to really enhance performance for that particular user base that's so reliant on those caching layers to really be able to operate let's call it an advanced website in a more performant way. Because otherwise, without various caching layers, Magento is often just a bit of a brick.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's probably fair. We all know Magento loves a bit of caching, and not just image caching, but HTML document caching, which becomes a really important thing in terms of scalability and performance.
Yeah,
so I think that's not dissimilar to most modern applications. To be honest, we think about even static site delivery, WordPress, you name it in the CMS landscape.
Sure, Drupal. I mean, you name it. That basically, I think everyone's looking for performance at this point. If they're not, we're trying to educate them because it's impacting their marketing campaigns and their conversion rates and so many metrics that they do care about. That that they have to be doing things to their website itself to be efficient, but there's absolutely things happening in the various hosting layers that are going to be crucial. So. It's interesting.
It has been interesting sort of watching this conversation develop over the last 10 years in web performance, where 10 years ago in the web performance conversation, it was more about the question of, does web performance improve conversion? Does web performance improve optimization in terms of user experience? And I think that conversation has changed now to not does it, but how do we most cost effectively deliver that performance for our application at any scale? So that we've sort of moved on from the should we to how do we?
Yeah. And I think it's partly the maturing of these communities and ecosystems that as time has gone on, developers have learned that these things are important and that they can work effectively with them. Others have become more educated. And so sometimes it takes time to get things through the process. I know that both of our teams are currently running into, little by little, more and more users that are adopting progressive web apps, PWA, front-end technology to load quickly and efficiently. I know a lot of that can be loaded up on the edge as opposed to running from some sort of a local environment.
Yeah, totally. I think progressive web apps, static site delivery. We're seeing headless commerce applications being delivered from the edge, where the core component of the application, database, etc., is stored locally, but the rendering component of an application can be delivered from the edge. Really changes the scaling paradigm for operations engineers, thinking about how they deal with the volume of traffic that may hit them, particularly when you get to things like Black Fridays, etc., where all of a sudden you're dealing with significantly more content, or significantly more traffic, I should say, than at other times. So I think edge architecture is really a boon for that type of engineering thinking.
I mean, we don't put out a proposal for a customer-facing web application of any sort, whether it's an e-commerce site, a CMS site, something else that doesn't have those components, that doesn't have an edge network for CDN and WAF and various other components addressed. It's sort of, and it's good in a lot of ways that it's become a mainstay. I always wonder about those that haven't gotten to that point in recent years. But I guess it gets more interesting. And, we run into a little bit of headless commerce. We're partnered with BigCommerce around Headless and, are able to support a variety of platforms that go in that direction. I think it's still early days in some ways in terms of mass adoption of folks going headless. But I think that the technology to do so and the value propositions are growing. We've been putting out a little bit of content on our blog and our site about it. We've been, we've tackled it a little bit on this podcast. but there continues to be more and more that we can push out into the edge, and more that we can get a better performance for. So, things like I think we had someone looking at with your team language translation and being able to handle that from the network, that your team provides, as opposed to trying to handle that locally. And just things that you can do to make changes on the fly in these different layers, these different hops, so to speak, that people are traversing as they're getting access to your website, to your content, to your designs and themes, and all these elements that work together. That sometimes people forget just how many layers there are, and how many additional things you can have there to really make the whole thing shine. So,
Totally.
we run DNS and SSLs and all sorts of things in different places than we might have in previous generations of what we do.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I think that's fair, and it probably raises an interesting conversation point around, as you were just sort of listing off these things, that application elements and capabilities that engineers can execute in a distributed network now. You kind of started thinking about, well, one of the key challenges for engineers thinking about deploying in that fashion is being able to have visibility and control over what's going on in that distributed framework. I think as our responsibility as providers of edge networks, that we make sure that what we deliver for engineers feels comfortable and seamless in terms of how they interact with all of these elements at the edge. Because I think if we don't give engineers the same level of access and control and familiarity with edge compute capability and edge networks as they currently have with cloud and centralized infrastructure, then it's going to be difficult for engineers to really feel comfortable with edge. So that's it's clearly something we're really focused on and interested in at Section, thinking about that application developer and operations engineer and how they interact with all of these components at the edge.
Yeah, and I think you hit on something interesting there, because we know that a lot of the site owners and a lot of the higher level folks involved with these businesses and organizations that need this technology, sometimes it's not in, it's a bunch of techno babble. It's too much. So, I know that our clients, they often trust us to bring the right options to them, and that's really important. In general, our goal is always to have the right advanced stack so that it is going to meet the needs and exceed the expectations of our clients. There are things that your stack in particular is interesting, especially in its alignment with how we look at things, that JetRails doesn't really like a black box. We like businesses to have choice, to be able to choose from the right technology. We want to be able to simplify the management of that and have things, look, you've got a great WAF, you've got great, tools to block out bots and DDoS attacks and other things. But if no one is monitoring and managing the tools, if nobody's seeing what's going on and tamping things down as things are going on, it doesn't always go as smoothly as one would like. There's that human element to security and to some of these other facets. So, our goal is always to be able to look, we've got a 24/7 NOC, an operations center where we can monitor and manage and maintain these things and handle it for you, but you have to have the right tech. So, your team gives us options of different AI powered WAFs and, best in class technology that can be stacked together. We don't have to choose, let's use this because the CDN is really strong there, but these other components that are part of it, maybe not as much. That basically you've containerized it, which is so interesting. I don't know if you have a lot of competitors that are doing something similar, but I know by and large for us, it's been a really good offering for clients that want to be able to choose the best from column A, B, C, and D, and so on. Is that really where you differentiate in market? Is that, one of the biggest value propositions of the technology that you've created and the processes and procedures that you've put into place?
You've definitely hit on something that's key to how we think about, I guess, the two major components of section, really, which is flexibility and control. So, as you mentioned, because we offer a containerized edge infrastructure, that means we can offer engineers flexibility in what they run at the edge. So yes, we do offer, as you mentioned, we offer multiple different web application firewalls on our infrastructure. We offer different image optimization technology, different bot mitigation technology, different acceleration technology, virtual waiting rooms. And more, and the opportunity, frankly, for engineers to bring custom workload to a section, whether that's containers or containerized or serverless workload, and we'll run that at the edge for them. But what that means, when I used to buy CDN as a CIO, when I was thinking about going to those content delivery networks, I had to make a choice as to whether I would go with CDN1, which was stronger in the performance element but weaker in security, or CDN2, which was stronger in security but weaker in performance. And I couldn't have the best of both worlds. So we built sections specifically to provide that sort of flexibility for engineers, so that they could choose the right software for their application at the right location. For example, some customers choose a higher end web application firewall to run on Sections platform, but are comfortable running a lower end image optimization solution. Or maybe they don't even need an image optimization solution, so they choose not to deploy it. So there's great flexibility there. But as I mentioned earlier, the other component that is really important for these engineers then is control and familiarity and control. So being able to think about approaching those elements with a proper application development lifecycle against the edge. So we've got a fully Git-backed workflow sitting behind the section platform, as well as an API-first mentality. So we are really thinking about this from the application standpoint as opposed to the network standpoint. If you think about the CDN world, it really did spawn from solving a network problem, a network element, a networking issue. And what we're talking about these days are more application style issues of how do I get my application to work more effectively for more users, but also in a cost-efficient manner, so that we can provide the right software in the right location at the right time.
At JetRails, one of our service areas is, while we have our own bare metal servers, and that's what a large portion of our users are hosted on, one of our bigger growth areas in recent years has certainly been hosting on the public cloud. So we started with AWS. We've been having a great time now with the team at DigitalOcean. And, in reality, when you start to pay for various elements like that, with our bare metal, now obviously we want to cut down the number of servers that you need and other bloat that might occur by trying to keep it all in one place. So by distributing some of that workload onto the edge, we can often see some good cost savings by better optimizing files and file sizes and other various components. It works out really well for the end user, but it's easy to see the savings in the cloud, where you're often like AWS, when you're paying for those resources for basically the bandwidth that's being used. It makes a big difference. So it's interesting that often these kind of technologies, not only, like you said, they'll increase speed, they'll increase security, they'll cut down on some of your cart abandonment in e-commerce or other conversion issues, but they will also, in many cases, help pay for themselves. I think it really depends on on the use case, whether it's going to be a net savings or some kind of cost. But for the value that you get, usually it's a really, really good mathematical formula. And I think that's often lost on folks. They see an additional expense. They don't always get to understand how that's going to plug in. Part of why folks come to hosts like JetRails, where they don't have to figure that out. We do that for them, but
that makes sense.
Keeps us in business, I suppose. That's a really good point.
I think you hit on the key point here earlier, which is that this can be technobabble to the people who pay for these services and ultimately enjoy the benefits of what we as IT practitioners deliver for our businesses. The CEOs of businesses are not looking for edge compute; they're looking for more performant application. They're looking for better conversion. They're looking for higher customer sat. They're looking for the lowest cost to be able to deliver all of those benefits for their business. And the technology teams in these organisations are challenged with finding the best way of delivering those benefits for their business. That's one of the other components I probably didn't mention that CEO would be looking for is risk mitigation. So yes, how can our technical teams in our industry deliver the best outcomes for their businesses for the lowest cost or the most efficient way possible? So we need to think about using technology tools like dynamic edge compute platforms and the experts at the team at JetRails to provide the solutions that enable all the benefits that the business want to enjoy for the right price for their business as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting that not every two organizations are the same. I was recently talking with an org that is in the ticket sales space, and they really cared about bot mitigation because more or less scalpers will try to come in, buy up the tickets, use automated systems to do that, and then they'll be selling the tickets for a premium to the real folks that actually want to go and see the show. And so you really want to limit the abilities of someone to go in and do that. I sat in for a talk with a friend in the industry, Philip Jackson, a few months back, and talking about how in the shoe industry there are all of these rollouts of special releases, limited releases, where maybe there's 1,000 of those sneakers available, and there's a big line at the door for those, digitally speaking. And so, not only do you want to make sure that the bots aren't getting in and buying them all up before real people can, which is just distressing for people that are very vested into that, but you also, in some cases, want to set that virtual waiting room where we really believe in auto scaling, and we want to have our customers ready for whatever traffic's going to come their way. We don't want customers in a normal situation to be in that virtual waiting room. It's our goal is to be load tested and ready so that shouldn't happen. But on the flip side, there are times when you do want people in the waiting room because it fits with whatever release you have or whatever else. And obviously, there's different organizations and different use cases for every piece of tech. But I think that also is an important factor to all of this, is that not every organization needs the same thing as even the mainstream. That there is capability to be able to get delivered the services and solutions that are going to have an impact for your organization, your business, your bottom line. And I'll pivot there. That one of the interesting things that I'd found about Section is that because you're containerized, basically, so if I think about this like, I don't know, like train cars, that you can decide which is in the lead, which is going to be first in the pack, and sort of, the order in which these operations are happening as data is being transmitted, as someone is visiting the site and, data is being sent out to that person's web browser. That there's also a hot swappable component to some of this, that if there's a failure in one of these systems or services, which, we see happen, some of the biggest companies out there, certainly, including the biggest clouds and otherwise, have had outages in recent years, months even, that impact a variety of services and users. A lot of these applications, they sit out there on AWS or Google's cloud or Azure, or other things, that part of their edge networks and otherwise. It's not necessarily all their own data centers. Often there are others like DigitalOcean in the mix. Have you found that speaking of redundancy, which is so important to web hosting in general, have you found that is that's something that's been a net benefit? Is it something that doesn't go into play as much, the ability to sort of hot swap if there's an issue with something, or maybe to have a failover service if one service goes down within that series of applications that you have running in the edge for folks?
Without doubt, we without going into great technical detail, we actually run quite a complex routing, scaling, workload management, and location optimization structure behind the scenes at Section. We run our platform. I think you mentioned all the major clouds there, and various other hosting providers. We run our platform on a wide variety of hosting providers. Our platform will move traffic and move workload dynamically between all those hosting providers if and when they have problems in particular locations. And they always do, and they always will have problems at particular locations. So we have seen many instances where a data center, maybe it's AWS East, is having problems going offline, and our platform will move traffic from one location to another and bring up that workload in other locations. So there's various layers of redundancy, and providing that for seamlessly for engineering teams where they don't even have to think about how many servers or how much RAM or CPU they need to buy in particular locations. Our platform just looks after all that and optimizes for them. We've seen some really good results protecting against attacks, dealing with infrastructure that is not as reliable as others in certain locations, and dealing with internet choke points in networking. So I think the conversation around redundancy is important from our perspective and how we think about our network. Probably you'd reframe that when the tech teams that we're working with are talking to their businesses, and they'd be talking about reliability and scalability as the key business outcomes for their organizations.
Yeah. It is interesting. I think as you go from those growing, established SMB players through mid-market and up to enterprise, how some of these conversations change and how some of them, in some ways, stay the same. It's every day is an adventure in the internet, one way or another. I know we touched on the fact that your system uses APIs. I know that our team is a web host that leverages lots of different systems, is reliant on those things to interconnect and interweave with our operation centers and such. How about data and analytics? I know that some of your competitors, try to provide an amount of information, try to help users understand how the network, that's being provided and the tools that are in place are affecting users. Have you found that to be something that's in demand, something that your team has had to invest a lot into addressing, or consistently pay attention to?
Look, I think I mentioned earlier that one of the elements that we need to give engineers here, and not just developers of applications, but also operations organizations, or maybe DevOps teams, depending on how you frame your internal team, need to feel the control of the edge environment. And in order to provide control, we need feedback loops. So metrics is a really big part of how we think about running the edge. We log all the requests to pass through our platform and replay that in a searchable logs environment. So Elasticsearch, Kibana, Logstash are a key interface in the Section console. And we also crunch that up into a metric so we can see some time series information there. Now that's available within about 30, it's less than 30 seconds of a request passing through our platform available to. So it's not technically real time, but it's pretty bloody close. That engineers and operations teams can find out what's going on at the edge at all times. So we're very passionate users of diagnostics and information. We encourage surfacing that in our customers' environments as well. One of the challenges as we think about distributed systems moving forward and edge compute is being able to visualize what's happening in a global application environment. And so I've actually spent quite a bit of time working with a company called MetaLab, who designed Slack from the ground up as the UX. Working on a new interface that's coming out shortly in section environments, a 3D visualization of global traffic that is useful not just on a day-to-day operations perspective for engineers, but also useful to be able to describe to the CFO, the CMO, or the CEO in an organization what's happening on the system at any point in time. I had a great one with one of our customers who've been a customer, a very large car manufacturer. Been one of our customers for some time and have been running a security layer and a caching layer on the section platform. And when I was walking through this visualization, an early prototype of this visualization with the engineering team, they said, that's where that layer is running globally. So it was a real light bulb moment for these folks to be able to see how and where the distributed system is running in some sort of visualization. So the answer to your question is yes, we're very strong on metrics, very passionate about metrics, and very passionate about engineering teams being able to use those metrics to describe the story of what they're doing and what wins they're having with an edge compute platform.
Yeah, I think it's often in one way or another overlooked that we all spend so much time talking about the goals that we don't always talk about how we get there or how we measure. So which are crucial, and that's what the behind the scenes folks are always working on. That's what teams like ours are investing a lot into. It's you have to be able to monitor and to see what's actually happening and to optimize. So really interesting. I was speaking on a webinar for DigitalOcean just a few weeks ago, and there was a question that came in about using a CDN with a particular SaaS platform. It had to have been either, off the top of my head, BigCommerce or Shopify. I know that folks in those platforms that we're partnered with BigCommerce around Headless, as I mentioned earlier, and that there are cases where folks will come to us to host a custom application that they have had written or a series of custom applications to work with their SaaS solution. But the SaaS solution itself is already hosted in the cloud, and in cases of platforms like Shopify, that there are CDNs in use. Have you found that there's any sort of a market, beyond, let's say, the open source communities of platforms like Magento and Drupal and WordPress and varieties of others? But has SaaS brought opportunities to your doorstep in some of the same way that in some cases it does to ours?
Yeah, I think so. Yes. It's like SaaS applications have unique challenges dealing with tens of thousands of domains for a particular application. So we also work with e-commerce websites. There are some other platforms that don't play very nicely with additional layers sitting in front, in that they've made specific architectural decisions to kind of break the internet.
Well said.
Delicately said. We actually do have a number of SaaS platforms who work with the Section Edge Compute platform. And the reason they work with Section versus other platforms is because of all of that automation and control suite, in addition to the flexibility to be able to choose the edge layer that makes sense for their application. So things like just simple things like the API structure to be able to spin up a new domain on the section platform without needing to come into the section console at all. And the fact that section provides automated certificates, SSL certificates for every customer, DNS records, configuration as code. All of these elements make it so easy for SaaS platforms to run the edge layers that they need. It's been again interesting watching the industry change. I think Let's Encrypt have done a wonderful job in the SSL space, where previously, if you went to some of the legacy CDNs, they would charge you an arm and a leg to run an SSL certificate on their platform. And in fact, I think a number of them still do charge you to run SSL certificates on their platform. When Let's Encrypt has changed the game and allows everyone to run SSL certificates for free. So we're fully integrated with Let's Encrypt and provide automated SSL certificates that auto-renew that you
and that's, I think, one of the most important parts that I've seen folks that try to use things like Let's Encrypt, they don't auto-renew. That leads to headaches. So no, spot on. Automation, systems help.
Yeah, nobody wants to be embarrassed by an expired SSL certificate on their website, right?
Not at all. It's, we certainly see a variety of businesses. We run into a lot of companies that are running outdated versions of PHP, that are running CMS and e-commerce platforms that aren't up to date in terms of patching and software updates. I mean, there's all sorts of things going on out there in the wild. You don't run into too many that that have their SSLs down for too long, but you do run into some that have their SSLs down in a recurring pattern every 6 months or a year.
There are some big companies that have done it in some very embarrassing moments, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And look, speaking of one of the bigger topics that keeps coming up on my plate is Magento 1 end of life, helping folks to stay PCI compliant through compensating controls if they can't get patches directly from Adobe. They may be able to get patches from another vendor like Mage One of our other partners.
Yep.
But nonetheless, being able to handle a lot of those security layers. So I imagine that our teams are going to keep running into more and more of that, where folks are looking to specifically understand what are the security layers, what do they have, who's monitoring what. I mean, look, a lot of the biggest data breaches that I can think of, usually there was some security system that noticed that there was something, amiss, something was awry, but it wound up, the alert wound up in some stack somewhere in some pile of emails that no one did anything about in a timely fashion. And that's how, Fortune 500s wind up in hot water. It's not that they didn't know that they had a problem. It's that they didn't take notice and react. So just understanding what's at play, because if your PCI compliance is in question, the last thing that you want to do is deal with any sort of a breach. That at that point, your liability, the fines and things that can be assessed of you are pretty dastardly. So, I think that we're going to keep seeing interesting subtopics within some of these communities as there are different issues that apply to different users for different time points. So,
I think our job between organisations like JetRails and Section is to make it as easy as possible for these engineering teams to achieve the outcomes that they're looking for, like maintaining levels of security. Most of these engineering teams are not looking to think about certificate renewal or some of those DNS records. They're looking to deliver their code, to make functional change to the core application that's going to change their organisation. So I think as organisations like JetRails and Section continue to deliver those core components that make it easy and cost effective for engineering teams, then we will see a better internet.
Awesome. Well, this has been a lot of fun. Always appreciate when we can get a slightly more technical conversation going, but hopefully one that helps folks that are less aware to become more aware of of what they can get out there and some of the net benefits and tools that they can take advantage of in the market. Anything new coming down the pike, or any final thoughts that you want to share before we wrap up for the day?
Well, there's plenty new and exciting coming. I mentioned we don't call it a UX, but a DX, a developer experience coming down the pipe. That is really going to be game changing, I think, in terms of how engineering teams can visualize and communicate around their distributed infrastructure, i.e. their edge compute. So that's really exciting. I just can't wait to get that in the market and get some people testing it. We're also spending a fair bit of time thinking about, we've built a machine learning structure behind our traffic forecasting to help the accuracy of moving traffic around to the right place at the right time and bring up infrastructure at the right place at the right time. So we're seeing some really good results from the neural net we've built there, and pretty excited to see that take effect in the wild as well.
Sounds like fun to me. I don't know if that makes me normal or not, but sounds like a lot of fun to me. Awesome. Well, Stu, this has been an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today. For our listeners, as always, thank you for tuning in. Feel free to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, or for the videos of our podcasts, available through YouTube and through our Facebook page in full. So great places to subscribe and to follow us. If you have thoughts, if you have comments, we love to hear from you. So whether through LinkedIn, Twitter, directly through jetrails.com, feel free to reach out. And, quick public service announcement, as we've been having, there are solutions on market. There are initiatives to help merchants that have been struggling in one way or another through the current COVID-19 crisis that economically and physically has impacted so many. We'll be sharing some links in the show notes in the description of the episode. If you know anyone that can benefit, by all means, please do share. As always, we appreciate you. If there's anything we can do for you, we hope to hear from you. Stay safe, stay healthy, and happy selling.